Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. Number the focal point, I've always been the person behind the camera, never in front of it. There's a comfort in that separation, seeing the world through a lens rather than being seen. I started photography as a hobby during college, but it quickly became my profession when a local newspaper picked up some of my urban landscape shots. That was 8 years ago. Now, at 32, I have my own small studio in downtown Portland where I do everything from wedding photography to corporate headshots. But this isn't about my career. This is about what happened 3 months ago when I started seeing things in my photographs that shouldn't be there. Things that weren't there when I took the pictures, faces. It began with a wedding shoot at the Pittock Mansion. Beautiful venue, though the October weather had turned unexpectedly gloomy. Rain spattered against the windows during the ceremony, and we had to move the reception photos indoors. The bride and groom, Melissa and David, were easygoing despite the weather complications. I shot over 1,000 photos that day, everything from the standard poses to candid moments. The next morning I uploaded the photos to my computer and began the tedious process of sorting through them. Delete the blurry ones, mark the best ones, adjust lighting where needed. Standard procedure. I was about halfway through when I noticed something odd in one of the group shots. The wedding party stood arranged on the mansion's grand staircase, bride and groom in the center, 4 bridesmaids to the left, 4 groomsmen to the right. 10 people total, but in the background, partially visible in the shadowy corner behind the last groomsman, was what looked like a face, pale, with dark hollows for eyes. I leaned closer to my monitor, squinting. Maybe it was a guest who had wandered into frame, but I would have noticed that while shooting. And this face, it was too indistinct, too blurry compared to everything else in the sharp image. I zoomed in. The face became pixelated but no clearer, just a pale oval with dark spots where the eyes should be and a horizontal line that might have been a mouth, or might have been nothing at all. Pareidolia, I said aloud to my empty apartment. That's the phenomenon where your brain perceives faces in random patterns, like seeing Jesus in your toast or a man on the moon. I'd read about it in a photography magazine once, how the human brain is hardwired to recognize facial patterns even where none exist. I marked the photo for deletion and continued working. 3 hours later I found another one, this time in a shot of the bride alone, standing by a window as she adjusted her veil. Behind her, reflected faintly in the glass, was another face. Different from the first, this one seemed older, with what might have been long hair framing it. My finger hovered over the delete key. The bride looked beautiful in the shot, the soft lighting catching the beadwork on her dress perfectly. But that face. I couldn't send this to clients with whatever that was in the background. I opened Photoshop and carefully edited out the reflection. Problem solved, except it wasn't. As I continued through the photos, I found more faces. 7 total, each in different photos, each slightly different in appearance, but all sharing that same quality, pale, indistinct, with dark voids where eyes should be. All positioned where I was certain no one had been standing when I took the shot. I finished the editing job at 2 a.m., my eyes burning from staring at the screen. I'd managed to edit out all the strange faces, and the final collection looked beautiful. Professional, normal, but as I shut down my computer, a cold unease had settled in my stomach. I delivered the wedding photos to Melissa and David the following week. They were thrilled, leaving me a glowing review online and promising to recommend me to friends. I should have felt satisfied, but the faces lingered in my mind. My next job was a corporate event, the grand opening of a new tech firm's headquarters in a renovated warehouse. Lots of suits, champagne, and forgettable speeches. I moved through the crowd, capturing candid shots of networking executives and the occasional posed group. The venue was interesting at least. They'd kept the industrial feel with exposed brick walls and steel beams, but added modern glass partitions and sleek furniture. Good contrasts for photography. I was reviewing the shots in my camera's display when I noticed something off about one of the images. In the background of a group shot, reflected in one of the glass partitions, was what looked like a face peering in from outside. But we were on the 4th floor. I quickly deleted the photo and took another. The new shot showed no face in the reflection, just a glitch, I told myself. Digital cameras sometimes have sensor issues that create artifacts in images. Nothing supernatural about it, but when I got home that night and transferred the photos to my computer, I found 3 more faces hidden in various shots, one peering around a column in the background. Another reflected in a champagne glass, a third seemingly floating above the crowd, half obscured by a hanging light fixture. None of them belonged to anyone at the event, I was sure of it. I edited them out, delivered the photos, and received another satisfied review. But that night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces staring back at me. A week passed. I had a light schedule, just a few headshot sessions at my studio. Simple, controlled environment. No mysterious faces should appear in a white backdrop setup with carefully positioned lighting, except they did. Not during the sessions themselves. The clients looked normal in the camera display, but when I uploaded the photos to my computer, they were there, hovering behind my subjects, sometimes just a suggestion of features in the shadows. Other times, clear enough that I could make out details: a woman with long dark hair and a crooked smile, an elderly man with deep-set eyes, a young boy with a blank expression. I started double-checking my studio after each session, searching for anything that might explain the anomalies. Reflective surfaces, odd shadows, nothing. I even set up my camera on a tripod and took a series of shots of the empty studio, changing nothing between exposures. The first 5 photos showed exactly what you'd expect: white backdrop, gray floor, black lighting stands. The 6th showed a crowd of faces, at least a dozen, all staring directly into the lens. I dropped my coffee mug. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending ceramic shards and hot liquid in all directions. But I couldn't look away from the monitor. The faces were clearer than before, more solid: a woman with hollow cheeks and stringy hair, an old man with a gaping mouth, a child with eyes that seemed too large for its face, and others partially overlapping as if they were all pressing forward to be seen. I deleted the photo immediately. Then I deleted the entire folder. Then I emptied my computer's trash. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use the mouse. "This isn't happening," I whispered to my empty studio. "This isn't real," but it was happening, and it kept happening. I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Levine was a calm, gray-haired woman with a soothing voice and an office that smelled of lavender. I told her I was experiencing visual hallucinations, that I was seeing faces where there shouldn't be any. "Only in photographs?" she asked, making notes on her pad. "Yes," I said, "never in person, never directly. And these faces, do you recognize any of them?" I shook my head. "They're strangers, but they seem, I don't know, aware. Like they know they're being photographed." Dr. Levine nodded thoughtfully. "Photography has always had connections to superstition. Some cultures believe cameras can capture the soul. Others think photographs can reveal spirits invisible to the naked eye." "I don't believe in ghosts," I said quickly. "I'm not suggesting you do, but the mind is powerful. Stress, sleep deprivation, even certain medications can cause visual disturbances." She prescribed me a mild anti-anxiety medication and suggested I take a break from photography for a week. "Rest your eyes. Rest your mind," she said. I agreed, canceled my upcoming appointments, and spent the next few days binge-watching mindless television shows. The medication made me drowsy but calm. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without dreaming of pale faces with dark, empty eyes. On the 4th day of my photography hiatus, my sister called. Her daughter, my niece Emma, was turning 8, and they were having a small party that weekend. "Nothing fancy," Claire said. "Just cake and presents in the backyard," but Emma specifically asked if Uncle Marcus would take pictures. "She wants to show her friends at school." I hesitated. "I'm actually taking a little break from photography right now." "Oh," Claire sounded concerned. "Is everything okay? Just some eye strain." "Doctor's orders to rest them." "Well, it wouldn't have to be anything elaborate, just a few snapshots. Emma would be so disappointed if you didn't bring your camera. You know how she idolizes her professional photographer uncle." I couldn't say no to Emma. She was the sweetest kid, with Claire's brown eyes and dimpled smile. "All right," I sighed, "for Emma. You're the best," Claire said. "See you Saturday at 2. After hanging up, I stood in the middle of my living room, suddenly aware of how quiet my apartment was. The medication had dulled my anxiety, but underneath that artificial calm, a familiar dread was building. What if the faces appeared in Emma's birthday photos? What if my sister saw them? What if everyone saw them? "It's not real," I told myself firmly. "It's stress, it's exhaustion, it's your mind playing tricks." But as I walked to my bedroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in my apartment. That something was watching me from just beyond my peripheral vision. Something with a pale face and dark, empty eyes. Saturday arrived too quickly. I packed my camera bag with reluctance, double-checking that I had extra memory cards and a fully charged battery. The medication had helped me sleep, but I still felt on edge as I drove to Claire's house in the suburbs. Emma greeted me at the door with an enthusiastic hug. "Uncle Marcus, did you bring your big camera? Can I see it?" "Can I take a picture?" I forced a smile. "Of course, squirt after cake, okay?" The party was small, just Emma, her parents, 3 of her school friends, and her grandparents. They had decorated the backyard with pink and purple balloons and a happy birthday banner. Normal, cheerful, safe. I took photos throughout the afternoon. Emma blowing out candles, Emma opening presents. Emma and her friends playing a game with water balloons. I checked each image on my camera's display after taking it. Nothing unusual appeared. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever strange psychological episode I'd been experiencing had run its course. As the party wound down, Emma asked if she could take a picture with my camera. I showed her how to hold it, how to frame a shot, how to press the shutter button halfway to focus before taking the picture. "Take one of me," I suggested, stepping back against the fence. It felt strange to be on this side of the camera, exposed. Emma raised the camera to her eye, her small face serious with concentration. "Say cheese, Uncle Marcus." "Cheese," I obliged, smiling. She took the photo, then lowered the camera to check the display. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping forward. Emma looked up at me, then back at the camera. "There's people behind you," she said. My blood ran cold. "What?" She turned the camera so I could see the display. There I was, standing against the fence, smiling awkwardly. And behind me, visible through the wooden slats of the fence, were faces. Dozens of them, pale, dark-eyed, some with mouths open as if in silent screams. I grabbed the camera from Emma's hands. "It's just a weird shadow," I said, my voice strained. The sun playing tricks, but Emma was staring at me strangely. "Who are those people, Uncle Marcus? They look sad." Before I could answer, Claire called from the patio. "Emma, time to say goodbye to your friends." Emma gave me one last curious look before running off to join her mother. I stood frozen, staring at the image on my camera's display. The faces were clearer than ever before, more detailed, more present, and they all seemed to be reaching toward me, their hands extending through the fence slats like they were trying to grab me. I deleted the photo and shut off the camera. My hands were shaking again, worse than before. I needed to leave. I needed to be alone to figure this out. I made hasty goodbyes, claiming a sudden migraine. Claire looked concerned but didn't press. Emma hugged me tightly before I left, whispering, "I hope the sad people feel better." The drive home was a blur. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Was I losing my grip on reality? Was my camera somehow defective? Or was something supernatural happening, something I couldn't explain or control? When I reached my apartment, I immediately connected my camera to my computer. I needed to see the other photos from the party to confirm that the faces hadn't appeared in any of them. The first few images were normal. Emma, cake, presents, friends. Then I reached a photo I'd taken of the whole group gathered around the picnic table. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss, but as I zoomed in on the background, I noticed something in the kitchen window behind them. Faces pressed against the glass, watching. I scrolled to the next photo. A shot of Emma opening a present. In the shadows beneath the table, dark eyes stared up at her. Next photo, Emma's friend throwing a water balloon. The water's splash forming what looked distinctly like a screaming face. They were in every picture, hiding in plain sight, watching, always watching. I slammed my laptop shut and backed away from my desk. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't stress or exhaustion or medication side effects. This was real. The faces were real, and they were getting closer. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to understand what was happening. And to do that, I needed to look more closely at the faces. I opened my laptop again and forced myself to examine every photo from Emma's party. I created a folder and saved screenshots of each face I could identify, zooming in as much as possible before the image became too pixelated. There were 23 distinct faces that I could make out clearly enough to catalog. Some appeared multiple times in different photos, others only once. I began to notice patterns. The woman with stringy hair and hollow cheeks appeared most frequently, often positioned closest to me in the frame. The elderly man with the gaping mouth usually appeared near the edges of photos. The child with the oversized eyes was always partially hidden, peering from behind objects or other faces. I spent hours staring at these images, trying to find some logic, some pattern that would explain their presence. Were they random digital artifacts, manifestations of my subconscious, actual spirits? By mid-afternoon, my eyes were burning and my head pounding, but I'd made no progress. I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. Fresh air, sunlight, normal people going about their normal lives. I left my camera at home. The streets of my neighborhood were busy with Saturday shoppers. I wandered aimlessly, trying to focus on the concrete reality around me rather than the impossible images on my computer. As I passed a small bookshop, something in the window display caught my eye. A book with a black cover featuring an old-fashioned camera surrounded by wispy, ghost-like figures. The title, Spirit Photography. History, Hoaxes, and Unexplained Phenomena. I went inside and bought it without hesitation. Back in my apartment, I devoured the book. It detailed the history of spirit photography, beginning with William H. Mumler in the 1860s, who claimed to capture images of the dead standing beside their living loved ones. Most were eventually exposed as double exposures or other darkroom tricks, but some remained unexplained. The book also discussed more recent digital phenomena, orbs, mists, and yes, faces appearing in photographs where none had been visible to the photographer. There were theories ranging from technical explanations, lens flare, dust particles, software glitches, to the paranormal, spirits, psychic impressions, dimensional overlaps. One chapter focused on a concept called thin places, locations where the boundary between our world and whatever lies beyond is weaker, places where strange phenomena occur more frequently, old buildings, crossroads, areas with histories of tragedy or intense emotion. I thought about the Pittock mansion where the wedding had been held. Built in 1914, it had seen its share of history, and the renovated warehouse for the corporate event. The book mentioned that repurposed buildings sometimes retain energetic imprints of their previous uses, but my studio was new, my apartment was new, Emma's suburban home was barely 5 years old, and less. I pulled out my laptop and opened Google Maps. I zoomed in on my neighborhood, then switched to the historical imagery option. I tracked the changes backward through time: 2020, 2015, 2010, 2000, 1990, 1980. In the 1970s aerial photos, my apartment building didn't exist. Instead, there appeared to be some kind of large structure with a central courtyard. I searched for historical information about my address and found that from 1932 to 1975, the site had been occupied by the Westside Sanitarium, a mental institution that was shut down after reports of patient mistreatment and several suspicious deaths. My apartment was built on the exact location where the sanitarium's morgue had once stood. I felt a chill run through me despite the warmth of my apartment. Could that explain the faces in my photos? Were they former patients somehow imprinted on this location? But that didn't explain the faces at the wedding or at the corporate event or at Emma's party, unless they were following me. The thought hit me with such force that I actually gasped aloud. What if these weren't random spirits tied to locations? What if they were specifically attached to me, or to my camera? I glanced at my camera bag sitting on the coffee table. The expensive Canon that had been my most prized possession for years now seemed menacing, like a doorway to something I didn't understand. I needed to test this theory. I needed to take more photos in different locations and see if the faces appeared. But the thought of intentionally trying to capture more of these images filled me with dread. Still, I had to know. I chose a public park for my experiment, open space, lots of people, broad daylight. I brought my Canon as well as my old Nikon that I hadn't used in years, and my iPhone. If the phenomenon was tied to a specific camera, this would reveal it. I found a bench and set up all 3 cameras. First, I took a photo of the empty path in front of me with the Canon. Checked the display, nothing unusual. I took the same shot with the Nikon. Again, nothing strange appeared. Finally, I used my iPhone. The photo looked normal. Relief washed over me. Maybe whatever had been happening was over. Maybe acknowledging it, researching it, had somehow resolved it. Then I took a selfie with the Canon, and there they were, standing behind me. At least a dozen faces, more distinct than ever before. The woman with stringy hair was closest, her pale hand reaching toward my shoulder. The elderly man's mouth was open wider than I'd ever seen it, revealing a dark void where his throat should be. The child with the oversized eyes was peeking out from behind a tree that in reality was at least 20 feet away. My hands trembled as I switched to the Nikon and took another selfie. Different angle, different faces, but still there. Still watching, the iPhone selfie showed nothing unusual, so it wasn't the Canon specifically. It was any dedicated camera, but only when I was in the frame. I hurried home, my mind racing. The faces only appeared when I was being photographed. They were attached to me somehow, not to the cameras or the locations. But why? What did they want? And why now, after years of taking photos without incident? Back in my apartment, I pulled out the spirit photography book again, searching for any mention of entities attaching themselves to specific people. There was a brief section on sensitive individuals who seemed to attract paranormal phenomena, often after some triggering event, a near-death experience, a period of extreme stress, or exposure to a haunted location. I hadn't nearly died recently, but stress, that had been a constant companion since when, I thought back, when had the faces first appeared, the wedding at Pittock Mansion about 3 months ago, what had happened before that. And then I remembered, 2 weeks before the wedding shoot, I'd done a freelance job for the Historical Society. They were documenting old buildings slated for demolition, and I'd spent a day photographing the abandoned Westbridge Hospital across town. The hospital had been creepy even in daylight, peeling paint, broken windows, medical equipment left to rust. I'd felt uneasy the entire time, like I was being watched. But I dismissed it as just the natural eeriness of abandoned places. Could that have been the trigger? Had I somehow attracted these entities during that shoot, opened some door that should have remained closed? I pulled up the folder from the Westbridge job, images I hadn't looked at since delivering them to the Historical Society. Most were straightforward architectural shots, wide angles of corridors, close-ups of interesting details, exterior views of the imposing brick structure. But as I scrolled through them, something caught my eye. In a shot of a former patient room, barely visible in the shadows of a corner, was a face. The woman with stringy hair and hollow cheeks. I continued scrolling. Another photo, another face. And another. They had been there all along, from the very beginning. I just hadn't noticed them until they became more numerous, more bold, more clear. Whatever door I'd opened at Westbridge Hospital, it was getting wider. And more were coming through. That night I dreamed of the faces. They surrounded my bed, pressing closer and closer until I couldn't breathe. The woman with stringy hair leaned down until her hollow face was inches from mine. Her mouth opened, wider than any human mouth should, and she whispered something I couldn't quite hear. I woke gasping for air, my sheets soaked with sweat. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m. My apartment was dark except for the dim glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds. Something felt wrong, different. The air seemed thicker somehow, charged with a strange energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. I reached for the lamp on my nightstand, but before my fingers found the switch, I saw it. A pale shape at the foot of my bed, indistinct in the darkness but unmistakably person-shaped. I froze, my hand still outstretched toward the lamp. The shape didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel it watching me. "This isn't real," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. "You're dreaming." The shape tilted what must have been its head as if curious about my words. In one desperate motion, I lunged for the lamp and switched it on. Light flooded the room. Nothing stood at the foot of my bed, nothing visible at least. But the feeling of being watched remained. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I called Dr. Levine and left a message requesting an emergency appointment. Then I called Claire. "Marcus, is everything okay?" "You sound terrible. I need to ask you something," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Did Emma say anything else about the picture she took of me, about the people she saw?" Claire was quiet for a moment. "She mentioned something to Robert about Uncle Marcus's ghost friends. We figured it was just her imagination." "Why? Did she seem scared?" "No, not at all. More curious, really. Marcus, what's going on?" "You're worrying me." I couldn't tell her the truth. She'd think I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. "It's nothing," I lied. "Just a weird photography thing I'm working on. Tell Emma I said hi." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my camera bag. I should get rid of it, sell all my equipment, find a new career. But photography was all I had, all I knew. Dr. Levine called back around noon. She could see me at 4 p.m. I thanked her and promised to be there. To pass the time until the appointment, I decided to do more research. I pulled up the Historical Society's website and searched for information about Westbridge Hospital. It had opened in 1924 as a tuberculosis sanatorium, later converting to a general hospital in the 1950s. It closed in 1987 after funding cuts. There was no mention of unusual deaths or circumstances that might explain a haunting, just another abandoned building with a mundane history. I searched next for information about spirit photography, going beyond what the book had covered. Most sources dismissed it as fraud or technical anomalies, but a few paranormal researchers suggested that cameras could sometimes capture wavelengths or energies invisible to the human eye. One website claimed that spirits were attracted to electrical energy, which might explain why they appeared in digital photographs. Another suggested that the intent of the photographer could influence what appeared in their images, that psychically sensitive individuals might unconsciously imprint their photos with visions from their subconscious. None of it felt right, none of it explained what was happening to me. At 3:30, I left for Dr. Levine's office, leaving my camera behind. I needed clear, rational advice from someone who wouldn't think I was losing my mind. But as I sat in her lavender-scented office, trying to explain what had been happening, I could see the concern growing in her eyes. "Marcus," she said gently after I finished, "what you're describing sounds like a combination of visual hallucinations and paranoid ideation. The faces you're seeing in photographs, the feeling of being watched, the elaborate connections you're making between unrelated events, these are symptoms we should take seriously." "They're not hallucinations," I insisted. "I can show you the photos. I believe that you see faces in these images," she said carefully, "but perception is subjective, especially when we're under stress or experiencing anxiety. Our minds search for patterns, for faces, for meaning. Emma saw them too," I countered. "My niece saw the faces in the photo she took of me." Dr. Levine made a note on her pad. "Children are highly suggestible. If you reacted strongly to something in that image, she might have picked up on your anxiety and interpreted the image in a similar way." I wanted to argue further, but what was the point? She'd already decided I was having some kind of psychotic episode. "I'd like to refer you to a colleague," she continued. Dr. Brenner specializes in visual processing disorders and has experience with cases similar to yours. In the meantime, I'm going to prescribe something stronger than the anti-anxiety medication you've been taking." I took the prescriptions and referral without further argument. But as I left her office, I knew I wouldn't be calling Dr. Brenner, and I wouldn't be filling the prescription for antipsychotics because the faces were real and they were getting closer. That night, I set a trap. I placed my Canon on a tripod in my living room, aimed at the couch where I would be sitting. I set it to take photos at regular intervals, one every minute for 2 hours. Then I positioned myself on the couch with a book, pretending to read while the camera clicked away. After the 2 hours were up, I retrieved the camera and connected it to my laptop. 120 photos. I took a deep breath and opened the first one. There I was on the couch, book in hand, and behind me, barely visible as a faint outline against the wall, was a face. I moved to the next photo. The face was slightly more distinct. Next photo, closer still. I continued through the sequence, watching with growing horror as the face, the woman with stringy hair, gradually materialized more fully in each successive image. By photo 60, she was clearly visible standing behind the couch. By photo 90, she had moved to the side of the couch. In the final photo, number 120, she was sitting beside me on the couch, her hollow eyes staring directly into the camera, her mouth open in what might have been a smile or a silent scream. And I had felt nothing while sitting there, no presence, no cold spot, nothing to indicate I wasn't alone. I slammed the laptop shut and backed away from it. This was beyond anything I had imagined. The faces weren't just appearing in photos, they were physically manifesting, becoming more solid over time, and I had no idea how to stop them. I spent that night at a hotel, leaving my cameras behind. But I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, even in the anonymous, sterile hotel room. I kept the TV on all night, the bland voices of late-night talk shows better than the silence in which I might hear whispers. In the morning, exhausted and no closer to understanding what was happening, I returned to my apartment. I had clients scheduled for headshots that afternoon. I needed to decide whether to cancel or try to proceed normally. As I unlocked my door, I immediately sensed something was different. The air inside felt heavy, charged with that same strange energy I'd noticed before, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, like old paper and dust. Like abandoned rooms, my camera bag sat where I'd left it on the coffee table, but my laptop was open, though I was certain I'd closed it before leaving. On the screen was a photo I didn't recognize. A group shot of people in old-fashioned clothing, 1920s or 1930s style. They stood in front of a large brick building that I recognized with a jolt, Westbridge Hospital, when it was new. I approached cautiously. It appeared to be a staff photo, doctors in white coats, nurses in uniform, orderlies in more casual attire. About 20 people total, arranged in 3 rows, and I recognized them. The woman with stringy hair stood at the end of the back row, her face gaunt but human, her hair neatly pinned back. The elderly man with the gaping mouth was in the front row, his mouth closed in a somber expression. The child with the oversized eyes wasn't there, but many of the other faces I'd been seeing in my photos were present, all looking normal, human, alive. At the bottom of the photo was a caption. Westbridge Sanatorium staff, October 1932. I hadn't downloaded this photo. I hadn't even seen it before. Someone or something had opened my laptop and displayed it for me to find. They were trying to communicate. With trembling fingers, I searched online for more information about Westbridge, specifically focusing on the staff from the early 1930s. It took hours of digging through historical archives, but eventually I found what I was looking for. A news article from December 1932 with the headline, "Tragedy at WSTBRIDG. Fire CLAIMS 13 lives." According to the article, a fire had broken out in the east wing of the sanatorium late at night. Most patients were evacuated safely, but 13 staff members who had been working the night shift were trapped and perished. The article listed their names. I cross-referenced the names with historical records and found photographs of several of the victims. They matched the faces that had been appearing in my photos. These weren't random spirits. These were the ghosts of people who had died together in a tragic fire nearly 90 years ago. But why were they appearing to me now? What did they want? I returned to my laptop and opened the folder of images from my time-lapse experiment. I studied the final photo where the woman with stringy hair, who I now knew had been named Alina Reed, head nurse, sat beside me on the couch. Her mouth was open. She was trying to speak, to tell me something. On impulse, I opened the audio recording app on my laptop and hit record. "If you can hear me," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "If you're trying to communicate with me, I'm listening now. What do you want? Why are you appearing in my photographs?" I let the recording run for 5 minutes, then stopped it and played it back. At first, I heard only my own voice and the ambient sounds of my apartment. But about 3 minutes in, beneath the sound of my own breathing was something else. A whisper, barely audible, "Help us," and then even fainter, "Trapped." A chill ran down my spine. I played it again, increasing the volume. Yes, those were definitely the words, "Help us, trapped." The Westbridge victims were trapped somehow, unable to move on, and for some reason they had chosen me to help them. But how? What could I possibly do for ghosts who had died decades before I was born? As if in answer to my unspoken question, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was from the Historical Society, a newsletter I'd subscribed to after photographing Westbridge. The subject line, "Westbridge Hospital demolition scheduled for next week." The email explained that after years of debate, the city had finally approved the demolition of the derelict hospital. The process would begin the following Monday, 5 days from now. Suddenly it all connected, the timing of the faces appearing in my photos, their increasing clarity and proximity, their message, "Help us, trapped." They were bound to the hospital somehow, and with its destruction imminent, they were becoming desperate, reaching out to the last person who had photographed the building while it still stood. To me, I needed to return to Westbridge, to find whatever was binding these spirits to the physical world before the building was destroyed and they were left trapped forever. Breaking into an abandoned hospital scheduled for demolition turned out to be surprisingly easy. The chain-link fence surrounding the property had already been cut through in several places by urban explorers or homeless people seeking shelter. I waited until after midnight, parked a block away, and slipped through one of these gaps with my camera bag and a powerful flashlight. The hospital loomed against the night sky, its broken windows like dark, vacant eyes. The main entrance was boarded up, but a side door had been forced open at some point and hung askew on its hinges. I hesitated at the threshold. What exactly was I looking for? Some physical object that needed to be removed or destroyed, a forgotten burial that needed proper recognition. I had no idea. But the spirits had been trying to communicate through my photographs. Maybe they would lead me to what they needed. I stepped inside, the beam of my flashlight cutting through decades of dust and darkness. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. Debris crunched under my feet, broken ceiling tiles, shattered glass, peeling paint chips. I made my way through what had once been a reception area, then down a corridor lined with former examination rooms. Everything of value had long since been removed or stolen. What remained were the bones of the building, walls, floors, ceilings, all in various states of collapse. I took out my Canon and began taking photographs, hoping the spirits would appear and guide me somehow. The first few shots showed nothing unusual, just empty, decaying rooms captured in the harsh light of my flash. Then in a shot of a long corridor, I saw her. Alina Reed, the head nurse, standing at the far end, beckoning. In the next shot, she was gone. I followed, moving deeper into the building's east wing, where the fire had occurred, according to the article I'd read. The damage was more extensive here. Walls blackened with ancient soot. Ceiling beams exposed where the fire had burned away the tiles. I continued taking photos as I went. More faces began to appear in them. The elderly man, Dr. Samuel Grayson, according to my research, pointing toward a stairwell. A young orderly named Thomas Chen gesturing urgently toward a door. I followed their guidance, descending the stairs carefully, testing each step before putting my full weight on it. The lower level was even more deteriorated, with standing water in some areas and the ceiling partially collapsed in others. The spirits led me to what appeared to have been a storage room. The door was warped in its frame, requiring all my strength to force it open. Inside, metal shelving units lay toppled and rusted. Decades of debris covered the floor. I took another photograph. This time, all 13 spirits appeared in the image, gathered in a circle around a specific spot on the floor. Alina Reed looked directly into the camera, her expression pleading. I moved to the spot they indicated and shone my flashlight down. Nothing but concrete floor covered in dirt and debris. I knelt and began clearing away the accumulated grime with my hands. Underneath the layers of dust, something was embedded in the concrete. A metal box about the size of a thick book, its lid flush with the floor. It looked like a floor safe or document box. I tried to pry it open with my fingers, but it was firmly sealed. Looking around, I found a piece of metal shelving that I could use as a makeshift pry bar. It took nearly 20 minutes of effort, but finally the lid gave way with a screech of protesting metal. Inside the box was a bundle of papers, yellowed with age but preserved in the sealed container. I carefully lifted them out and shone my flashlight on the top page. It was a letter dated October 15, 1932, about 2 months before the fire. The letter was from Alina Reed to the hospital administrator, detailing concerns about safety violations and patient mistreatment. It was signed by all 13 staff members who would later die in the fire. They were whistleblowers attempting to expose corruption and neglect within the institution. Beneath the letter were documents supporting their claims, financial records showing funds meant for patient care being diverted, incident reports that had been officially denied, photographs of unsafe conditions and neglected patients. The truth hit me with sudden clarity. These 13 people hadn't died accidentally. The fire hadn't been a random tragedy. They had been silenced, their evidence hidden away where it would never be found. Their spirits remained bound to this place because their story had never been told, their deaths never properly acknowledged for what they were: murder. I carefully gathered all the documents and placed them in my camera bag. As I stood to leave, I took one final photograph of the room. In the image that appeared on my camera's display, the 13 spirits stood together, their expressions no longer desperate or pleading. Elena Reed nodded slightly, a small smile on her face. "Thank you," she seemed to say. I made my way back through the decaying hospital, up the stairs, down the corridors, and out into the cool night air. The weight of what I had discovered pressed heavily on me, but also filled me with a sense of purpose. These people deserved justice, even decades after their deaths. Their story needed to be told. The Historical Society was skeptical at first. A nearly century-old conspiracy was difficult to swallow, especially coming from a photographer with no historical credentials, but the documents spoke for themselves. The signatures could be verified against personnel records. The financial discrepancies could be confirmed through archived public records. I didn't tell them how I had found the documents. I claimed I had discovered them while photographing the hospital before demolition, hidden in a storage room I'd explored out of curiosity. It wasn't entirely a lie. The demolition of Westbridge Hospital was delayed pending an investigation. The story made local news, then national as more details emerged. The 13 whistleblowers who had died trying to protect their patients were posthumously honored by the medical community. A memorial was planned for the site after demolition, and my photographs, they showed only empty rooms now. No pale faces with dark, hollow eyes, no reaching hands, no silent screams. Whatever door I had opened at Westbridge had closed again. The spirits had moved on, their unfinished business completed. I should have felt relieved. I did, in a way, but something had changed in me. I understood now that a camera could capture more than just light and shadow, that the boundary between worlds was thinner than most people realized, that some things needed to be seen to be believed. I still work as a photographer. I still see the world through a lens rather than being seen. But now, sometimes, when I review my photographs, I look a little more carefully at the shadows in the background, at the reflections in windows, at the spaces that should be empty. Because I know now that we're never truly alone, that there are always eyes watching from just beyond the veil, and sometimes, if you look carefully enough, you might just glimpse them looking back.